thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and again, welcome to the Kennedy Space Center. So as Mark mentioned, I'm going to spend a little bit of time telling you a little bit about the space program, particularly focusing on the part that I know the best, if you will, is the Space Shuttle program. Fantastic vehicle, 30 years of flying the Space Shuttle, 135 missions. But it's been over 5 years now since we last flew the shuttle. So just make sure everybody understands we're really almost talking from a historical perspective now. The last flights have taken place. We're building a next generation spacecraft. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But I'll tell you just a little bit about the Space Shuttle and the Astronaut program, and hopefully stretch your imagination a bit about some of the things that are going on. Interestingly enough, even though we're not flying the Space Shuttle, we're still flying astronauts to the International Space Station. We're doing so using the Russian-built Soyuz vehicle. As it turns out, with the retirement of the shuttle, the United States no longer had a way to get humans into space. Now, we take cargo up there on unmanned rockets, but no humans. So we're relying on the Russian-built Soyuz vehicles to take our astronauts up to the International Space Station. But we are still selecting astronauts, just in case there's one or two budding astronauts in the crowd today. You may be interested in it. Criteria for selection hasn't changed as much. In fact, I understand that we should hear sometime within the next couple of weeks about the next group of selectees for the astronaut program. They actually started that selection process a little over 2 years ago. So an incredible amount of detail that goes into selecting people for the program. When I applied for the program back in the late 1970s, we had about 8,000 people that applied for the astronaut program. They selected 19 of us in my class. The current class that's undergoing a selection process, and 18,300 people applied for the program, and they're going to select about a dozen. So pretty intense competition in there. The criteria hasn't changed much over time. For the shuttle, you had to have a minimum of a Bachelor of Science degree in technical field, so science, technology, engineering, or math. And when I say that, there's nothing against art, music, literature, all those other disciplines that are out there, but this is rocket science, and having a technical degree is important. Hopefully you'll understand a little bit more about that as I talk about the program. So again, a minimum of a Bachelor of Science degree in the technical program. NASA's changed that a little bit. They highly recommend that in addition to a Bachelor of Science degree, you have one or more graduate degrees, again, in the technical field, science, technology, engineering, and math. And there is no one preeminent field, by the way. I sometimes get asked, do I need to have a degree in astrophysics or aeronautical engineering? No, again, as long as it's in the technical field, there's no issues with that. Now, the shuttle program is unique, and one of the really unique things about it is to be able to bring the craft back, landing it much more or less like a conventional airplane. We'll talk a little bit more about those kinds of details. But because of that requirement to do that, if you're going to be a pilot, and that was the category I was selected in, as a pilot for the program, we had to have a minimum of 1,000 hours of single pilot jet time, be a graduate of the military test pilot school. Now in the future, you don't have to have that requirement. The type of craft that we're going to be using will not come back and land like the space shuttle did. So the piloting requirement is still sufficient, but not necessary to do that. We have kind of a joke inside the astronaut office, by the way, the perfect astronaut candidate. We have a PhD in astrophysics, 10,000 hours of flight time, be 24 years old. We're still looking for you, so in case you want to apply, it's not too late to do that. Again, now once you do get selected for the program, you don't just jump in and start training for a mission. You go through, largely referred to as like an undergraduate degree in spaceflight. Remember, there is no one preeminent field, so not everybody's a pilot, not everybody has an engineering degree. So a variety of different backgrounds. So the first couple of years, you spend in just learning the basics of spaceflight. And then some of the things that you might imagine, things like the physics of spaceflight, the orbital mechanics, as we call it, what it takes to get a vehicle up in orbit and keep it there. Astronomy. We use the stars to navigate, so having at least a basic knowledge of astronomy is important. And then something that might surprise you, human physiology. What happens to the human body when you get up there in space? We're continuing to learn things about that as we go over time. Now, some of you may be familiar with the fact almost everybody who flies in space gets some degree of space motion sickness. It's very common. It's linked, a little bit linked to seasickness or air sickness, that type of motion sickness. A few little bit different causes. Almost everybody who flies in space gets some degree of space motion sickness. The good thing is you get over it very quickly, and it really doesn't limit you when you're up in orbit. I know I did my first flight. I've never been air sick. I've never been seasick. First flight in space, second day up there, I knew something was going to be a little bit different. Sure enough, I got a best flight out of the Space Motion System. Second flight did not, so we've learned a little bit about that. So a lot of different things. We'll talk a little bit more about that physiology associated with space flight as well. So lots of different things that go into training for it. As you get through that initial training, it's also an evaluation program. NASA's evaluating you. You get to see, did we select the right people for this class? You're also evaluating NASA. It's a tough job, as it turns out. There are a lot of challenges associated with it, a lot of time, not unlike a variety of other fields that are out there, but it is a very, very demanding job. In fact, I sometimes refer to an astronaut, world's greatest job title. Notice I didn't necessarily world's greatest job, but at the very least, it's the world's greatest job title. When you get done with that initial training, you become eligible for selection for a flight. I was selected for my first flight. Actually, would have flown in 1983 aboard the Columbia. Unfortunately, that flight was canceled. It was a joint NASA-ESA, European Space Agency mission. Funding for that flight was deleted, and so we went back in the queue, reselected for a flight that should have flown in March of 1986. Of course, we had a Challenger accident in January of that year, so that flight was canceled. It was almost 30 months. It was, in fact, almost 2 years before we got to flight. So my first crew up here flying on board Discovery. 5 of us on that flight. As it turns out, 4 of us were military guys, and our one lone civilian was a medical doctor, Jim Beatty. Kind of nice to know that, because we never had backup crews for the shuttle, so if somebody got sick or whatever up there, nice to have a doctor on board that could kind of take care of things. And we do a lot of medical research on board, and I can do simple things like blood draws and injections and things like that, but if somebody's going to do a muscle biopsy or insert a heart catheter, you really want somebody who's trained to do that sort of thing. So having a doctor on board was kind of a good deal. Through that flight, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Came right back from that flight, was reassigned to a second flight on board Atlantis. Kind of a unique mission. A couple different things about Atlantis. Has anybody, it's kind of early in the day, has anybody been over and seen the Atlantis exhibit yet? Because over in the northeast quadrant of our campus here, we actually have the spaceship that I flew on. Atlantis is over there. You'll be able to see it just exactly as it was in space. Fantastic to be able to see that craft. And while I'm here, I always refer to it as my space shuttle. So today, if you have some time, you should go over and see my space shuttle. Kind of a unique mission. Among other things, was a night launch here out of the Cape. If there's anything more spectacular than a day launch, it's a night launch. Absolutely a fantastic display when that craft moves off with 7 million pounds of thrust and arcs into the atmosphere. This was a little bit different mission, lost in the early history of the space shuttle program, as NASA and the Department of Defense were actually partners in the space program. And so the shuttle was in fact some ways designed to carry out what we call top secret military or reconnaissance type payloads. This was one of those missions. I can tell you we deployed a satellite on that mission. That's where that story stops. It's still classified here over almost 30 years later. All 5 of us on this particular flight were military pilots, and somebody had a sense of humor. We represented all the different service academies as well as all the services up there. But unlike my first flight where we had a doctor on board, we had no flight surgeon on board this flight. When that happens, one of the crew members is picked to be the doctor. And I was the one that got selected for that, which was kind of interesting. I think in a different lifetime, I might actually have been a physician, a surgeon, perhaps. But anyway, I got to go through some emergency medical training, got to, do injections, pull sutures, insert trach tubes, do a variety of things. Most people don't even know this, but on board the shuttle, we could do up to and including an appendectomy up there on orbit. And I really enjoyed the training for doing all that. We would get different flight surgeons and go into MD Anderson Hospital and scrub in on surgery and do some things like that. So a real wealth of knowledge about it. And I was the only one on the crew that was going through this training. So at the end of each week, we'd come back and get together and have kind of a rehash of what we had learned during the week. And I was always really excited about all the things I learned about the medical profession. And I noticed that the rest of my crew wasn't near as interested in it as I was. And it finally dawned on me. They were worried that they were going to get sick or hurt. Dr. Bob from the John Wayne School of Medicine was the one that was going to have to take care of them. And they were not thrilled by that. Fortunately, we didn't have any big medical emergencies. Carl got a little bit sick up there, and I got to give him a few injections and some blood draws, but that was about the X7. So two very, very different crews. Now, we did, again, a lot of training, a lot of different areas, and we'll talk about some of that. We focused really on the shuttle cockpit. To put this in perspective, you've got to remember what a complex vehicle that was. You take all those systems working together, some 2.5 million parts. As we say, 2.5 million parts flying in very, very close formation. So incredible complexity inside the vehicle itself.